Welcome to the Rise of Cryptocurrencies show. There have been some important developments in the sector following October's volatile month in the stock market, while cryptocurrencies have proven to be not only stable but entirely uncorrelated with other asset classes. Also, improvements in the Lightning Network, as well as the announcements out of major banks and trading platforms regarding crypto custodian services and offerings to clients to trade stocks with their cryptocurrencies on one screen and perhaps even a future ETF. These are important developments, and we are very excited to have Paul Rosenberg, the editor-founder of freemansperspective.com, with us today because he's an expert on these subjects and would love to get his take. Very, very, very good guy, and we had a really nice chat off the air here. And I think you're really going to appreciate his perspective. So, Paul, thank you for joining us.
Oh, glad to be here. Thank you.
Hey, sir, most people are under the impression that cryptography and cryptocurrencies and digital payments, digital cash started with Bitcoin. But actually, Bitcoin is simply the most recognized successful attempt. But can you broaden our view as to the history of this industry?
Sure. Electronic cash of whatever type really began in the 1980s with a guy named David Chaum. It was built upon the advances in cryptography before then, because if you have money, obviously it has to be protected. You can't just leave your number string that identifies your money out in the open. Everything has to be encrypted somehow or another. And Chaum began to solve some of the problems, solved a bunch of problems in the 1980s, had a company called DigiCash. It didn't continue for terribly long. That was followed by other ideas. And then we had, in the late 90s, we had eGold, which was essentially gold in a vault, and you could buy and sell so many grams or portions of a gram of gold and send it to your friends. And the system worked beautifully, worked very nicely until ultimately the U.S. government decided that they didn't like the competition and shut it down and seized all the gold in about 2008. And that's when Satoshi, whoever he, she, or they may be, put together Bitcoin and put it together from things that had already been done by these other people. He took, I'm using he for convenience, Satoshi took Diffie-Hellman key exchange, which was really important, took a whole bunch of things, including things like peer-to-peer exchange, like BitTorrent, like people download music and videos, that technology, and rolled it all up into one and created a currency system that was protected by cryptography end to end so that there was no head that could be cut off. And Bitcoin, as we all know now, has succeeded wildly under very extremely adverse conditions for, just about 10 years now. But it was the culmination of many other things, and of course it's continuing to adapt all at the same time now. But it was really the culmination of a number of things that had been done previously.
Now, what are your thoughts regarding current events in the sector?
Well, Bitcoin proceeds, fairly well apace. It has spawned a lot of children in these days. What I mean by that is the other cryptocurrencies, which are, most of them are pretty well clones of Bitcoin. Tweak this, make this a little more, make this a little less. There are a few others that are modifying it more vigorously. But it's a wonderful thing to see. Bitcoin, while it's a tremendous invention, was never meant to be the end of the line. We need all these other currencies. Bitcoin is never by itself going to replace Visa or MasterCard. You just simply can't pump that many transactions through it. It just will not work. So we need other currencies to do that and to do other things. We need currencies that specialize in privacy, because Bitcoin is not particularly great for privacy. It is if you use it the right way, but very few people do. And so we need other currencies that are adaptable to privacy. Monero, Zcash, and some of the others are doing quite a good job of it. They're not perfect yet, but we're only 10 years, barely 10 years into this thing. It's not going to just immediately exist in a perfect final form right away. It's going to take some years of further adaptation, and we're getting them. Things like the Lightning Network, which allows many more transactions to go through a Bitcoin system, is doing very well. People are putting together nodes, they're putting together systems. We have a lot of people who are working on more friendly interfaces so that, you can give it to your uncle or your aunt or your grandma and say, here, just click this and click this. Rather than downloading wallets and saving your private keys and doing all those things that require a little bit of technical skill, at least technical comfort. We have people developing ones that are just easy. You can just, point and click. Those are necessary for us. We have people building all sorts of networks into South America and Africa and all the little forgotten parts of Asia where people don't have bank accounts, but they have cell phones. And as long as you've got a cell phone, you've got crypto. So all of these things are going on at the same time, and it's a miracle to behold. There's thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people who get up every day and are turning this into something. It's incredible.
Okay, so, let's talk about government systems, government currency systems, our current monetary system, the fiat monetary system, where you basically have a central bank in every other country, and it's either quasi-governmental, fully governmental, but regardless, it works in a certain fashion, and then you have cryptocurrencies that work in a different fashion. Can you make some important comparisons regarding the fundamental differences between the two as you see them now 10 years into it, and obviously with your 25 years experience here?
Sure. The fiat money that we're all familiar with works on a banking system, and it allows the banks to create money out of nothing at all. When you go into your bank to get a loan for your house or car or whatever, they're not taking your neighbor's money and giving it to you. They're just entering a number on a line and hitting enter, and all of a sudden that money is created. That's the way banking works. It's obviously more complicated than I'm saying, but that's essentially the way it works. And it also works by creating massive amounts of debt. When you create $1, you're also creating a debt obligation. There's no reason it has to be that way, but that's the way it is. And so it creates this very complicated system, and then we have a Federal Reserve. I'm talking about the United States now. Every place else is pretty similar. Differences, but very similar. The Federal Reserve creates dollars and does it in exchange for Treasury bills, all of which have interest attached to them, and it really complicates things. Whereas cryptocurrency, it just is. It's math. You can't change it. There will be 21 million Bitcoins, and that's it. And 17 million have already been made. And they're just going to come in a trickle for the next number of years, and then that's it, 21 million. Whereas if you get dollars, they just add more of them all the time, diluting the value of the existing dollars. So that's why, you look at it long term, Bitcoin has to go up in price so long as it exists to any significant level, because there aren't making any more of them. And it's a wonderful store of value in that way. Now, people say, yeah, well, it's so volatile. Well, yeah, but it's brand new. What do you expect? And the volatility, by the way, is mostly on the upside. So what's not to like? It was $400 a few years ago. Now it's $6,500 or so, and who knows what it'll be in a couple of years, regardless of the spikes that come, which will get less and less as time goes on. I'm sure there will be big spikes and some falls in the future, but what do you want? Perfection out of something that's brand new? Sorry, you're not going to get it. Give it time, and it'll be there. And it's been, as you mentioned, it's been remarkably stable over the last 6-8 months, more stable than anything else in the entire financial system that I can think of. So crypto is in very many ways just simply a superior currency. The only problem with crypto is that the banks don't like it. The ECB in particular really hates it. They've been fighting against it, making all sorts of laws in European countries about owning crypto and being taxed on crypto and really draconian kind of stuff. The U.S., to their credit, has been more reasonable. And as you also mentioned, there may be ETFs one of these days. So it also makes an interesting dichotomy of the Europeans versus the Americans in this. So in general, crypto, as I view it, is better money. And it is certainly money that gives space for adaptation, for new possibilities. Whereas with government money, if you don't have permission, you're an outlaw, and you can be shut down as a money launderer, which no one knows what that really means, and so on and so forth. Crypto makes for a better future. It's not perfect. It needs help. It needs lots of us to jump in and make it better. But it's a future-friendly technology, whereas government money enforces the regimes of the past and is ultimately supported by violence or violent-backed activities.
So, Paul, let me change gears altogether and talk about the midterms. We're doing this interview on, I am on the 10th. You're probably on the 9th because I'm in New Zealand. You're in the States, which is kind of cool. Let's talk about the midterms elections. Trump calls it a big success. What do you think, judging on history, on how to run a government with a Democratic House, a Republican Senate, and then a president who used to be part of the Democratic group, and now he ran and won as a Republican?
Yeah, it's a wild scene, as they used to say. In general, I'm very non-political in one way. I don't vote, and I think the whole thing is a big circus, but it's a circus that does have some impact upon real life. So honestly, I think that having divided government is in general a good thing. It's in the gaps. It's in the places where you have the two giants fighting each other that the little guys find room to adapt. Look at like the Scottish Enlightenment. What a wonderful period of development that was. The things that went on during that time are just stunning if you see a list of them. And it happened because power was kind of in a vacuum because one group of big shots was fighting another group of big shots, not violently. And it opened a free space where people could begin to think outside of prescribed limits. And so when you have divided power, it kind of opens more mental territory where people can operate. And with Trump, what I've seen out of it is I suppose I would call it a weakening of the status quo model, where everybody follows everybody else and everybody does the same basic thing. And of course you obey whatever the politicians say because they're the politicians. And if you don't, you might get in trouble. So everybody just does what everybody else does and shut up and keep doing it. Don't make trouble. That's kind of starting to crack. It's not always cracking in pretty ways. You got the polarizations. The guys on the hard left and some of them are on the hard right are just going kind of, I don't know, ape blank crazy, violent and nasty and hateful, and they're all in their own little echo chambers, and they just get more polarized and more hyped up and more polarized and more hyped up. And what becomes of it, I don't know, but the status quo is looking a whole lot less eternal and almighty than it used to be. And for at least that much, I think I'm grateful.
Okay, so let's talk about federal government obligations that far exceed their income, via taxes. So we are projected to have a $1.3 trillion 2019 deficit, and therefore it should be definitely considered that it might be 1.4, 1.5, 1.6, who knows, right? Because they rarely meet their initial numbers. Though I wouldn't put it past them to flip on us and basically make the first number outrageous. And when they do meet it, or spend even less, it actually looks good, but they end up spending $1 trillion more than they have. But regardless, I've had guests on shouting from the rooftops that the next crisis will be the worst ever, and pinning it mostly on federal debt, unfunded liabilities. But on the flip side, you see the S&P 500. You go down the list of companies that are the most productive and resourceful and imaginative and constructive to the economy, and we're seeing lots of success. And these things seem to be on different paths. Companies that are beating on earnings, beating on revenue, expanding globally, etc. And then you see the federal government, which is in a very bad situation. And do you think the next recession, the next market crash, will be horrible to companies that are actually doing well? Do you think investors will sell off, will panic sell their holdings in stocks because the federal government, which is an altogether different entity, is not doing well itself? Well, how do you see this relationship play out?
Well, I don't see people panic selling on the Fed anytime soon, or the federal government anytime soon, just because the federal government has the inertia behind trusting and obeying the federal government is gigantic. When the government says jump, 99.x% of people say, yes, sir, where shall I jump, sir? And they trust them. They have an emotional need to trust this big thing. So I don't see people panicking about it, and it's really hard to say what the next recession will be like. I'm not at all convinced that it's going to be some horrible, gargantuan thing. It could be. There's concerns about, certainly gigantic concerns about federal debt, with states bankrupt, corporations, a lot of them have an incredible amount of debt, pension funds that are horribly underfunded. There are reasons to think that there could be real serious problems. But one of the things we need to remember, anybody who does financial analysis, is that in the center of this entire thing is a giant black box that we can't see into. And by that I mean in the U.S., the Federal Reserve. These people, listen, in the last set of problems, 2008 or so, they bought, depending on whose numbers are correct, something like $14 trillion of assets. Just bought them, created the money, bought them, owned stocks and bonds, and Ben Bernanke was buying, what was it, $40 billion of housing paper every year, or every month, pardon me. And these guys set the interest rates. They buy and sell with abandon. They get a little slice out of every dollar as it's being made, and we know nothing about them. We don't know who they are. We don't know what they really want. We don't know how they communicate. We don't know anything about them. And this is sitting in the middle of the economy. And any guesses that we make, and we have to make guesses, we have to make projections, we don't have much choice. But I think we need to remember that there's this gigantic entity sitting in the middle of it that we can't even see into. So, I like to try to be a little humble in my projections, because I know that I can't see inside of that thing, and I don't know what they're thinking. There's all kinds of things they can do. I'm shocked that we haven't had massive price inflation in the last 10 years because they created so many currency units. Well, they're obviously doing something behind the scenes that I didn't expect. So the next recession, it could be horrible, but I wouldn't bet on it. The storyline of the apocalypse, when the virtuous are left standing at the other side, it makes for a great movie. but it's not a great way to invest. We just don't know enough to count on that. At least I don't.
Paul, where can people check out more of your work? I've been to your website many times. Great content over there, great articles. Tell people, real quick where they can follow you if you have any social accounts, and that's it basically.
Sure. The newsletter I write a monthly newsletter called Parallel Society. It's at freemansperspective.com, just the way it sounds, freemansperspective.com. We have free weekly articles and, again, the monthly newsletter for $100 a year, content that you don't get anywhere else.
Perfect. Hey, thanks very much for taking the time here.
Oh, it's my pleasure.